Imagine a massive, vibrant region where the overall wealth is just climbing. I mean, citizens are suddenly living 2 whole decades longer than their parents did.
Right, which sounds like an absolute
Oh,
miracle.
exactly. And on top of that, you have this modern tech-driven service sector that is just booming.
It's the ultimate economic success story on paper.
It really is. It sounds like the kind of triumphant narrative you'd see on the cover of some global finance magazine.
Oh, absolutely. The classic rising market headline.
But what if I told you that in that exact same economy, 7 out of 10 workers are just surviving day to day, like
Yeah.
in deeply vulnerable, informal jobs?
Which completely shatters that glossy magazine narrative.
Completely. And what if the entire system, like, despite all that apparent growth on the surface, is quietly being propped up by a staggering $37 billion foreign aid IV drip?
Yeah, then you're suddenly looking at a profound structural paradox. It's a totally different story.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We are turning our attention to the socioeconomic reality of the Africa, Eastern, and Southern region.
Which we'll be referring to as the AFE region today.
Right, the AFE region. And you're here because you want to understand what is actually happening on the ground there, like beneath all those contradictory headlines.
And to do that, we are operating from a very specific set of source materials today.
Yeah, we aren't looking at PR brochures or, political speeches. We are looking at a meticulously crafted, intensely rigorous data analysis.
And honestly, the visual presentation of that data, it speaks volumes before you even read a single number.
I am so glad you brought that up because the design aesthetic here is highly deliberate. It's an expert-level deck.
It is incredibly austere.
Austere is the perfect word. I mean, we're talking pure, stark, white backgrounds. The color palette is strictly low saturation academic, so, slate grays, muted dark greens, deep, serious blues.
Very intentional choices.
Yeah, and there's this strict rule applied by the analysts throughout the whole thing. Absolutely no 3D graphics, no drop shadows, no visual fluff whatsoever.
It's an approach that deliberately strips away emotion. Like, when you remove the gradients and the flashy formatting, you force the reader's eye directly onto the raw mechanics of the data.
Right.
It's just a very confident way to present research. It basically says, the numbers are compelling enough, they don't need a disguise.
Exactly. And our mission today is to decode those raw mechanics. We are going to mentally walk you through this visual narrative.
Because there is a massive story hidden in these sleek charts.
Yeah, we're exploring the demographic tidal waves, the shifting economic structures, and the looming environmental challenges of the AFE region over the past few decades.
And just looking at the executive summary slide, it sets the stage perfectly.
It does. You immediately see the region's story split into 4 interconnected matrices. They're boxed in by these clean, light gray lines.
Right, covering population, economy, employment, and the external environment.
And there are these tiny, low-saturation icons. A microscope, a book, a gear, a globe. Just quietly guiding you.
And you really have to look at all 4 of those matrices simultaneously.
Why is that?
Well, if you only look at population and economy, you see a miracle. You see incredible growth.
Okay, right.
But if you only look at employment and the external environment, you see a crisis. So the truth of the AFE region is the friction between those realities.
The friction, I like that. So let's dive into that friction, starting with the population matrix, because there is a data visualization here that I honestly haven't been able to stop thinking about.
The public health chart.
Yes, it tracks public health and demographics, and the centerpiece is this dual-axis chart. It's just incredibly stark.
It really jumps out at you.
So one line tracks the region's life expectancy, and it's pushing sharply upward.
Right.
And then the other line tracks the proportion of deaths caused by communicable, maternal, and nutritional diseases. And that line is sloping sharply downward.
And right in the middle.
Right in the middle, they cross. The analysts actually used cross arrows to highlight it. It creates this perfect scissors shape.
That scissors difference is arguably the most important public health milestone a developing region can achieve.
Really, the most important.
Absolutely. Let's look at the baseline data. The chart points out a historical low for total population life expectancy at birth in the AFE region.
Yeah, they have a gray dashed circle around it.
Exactly. It marks the low point, which was hovering around 44.1 years.
Okay, I want to pause right there because 44.1 years, that isn't just a statistic. Think about what that means for the actual fabric of a society.
It completely alters how a culture operates.
Right. If the average life expectancy is 44, you're looking at a society essentially operating without a massive cohort of elders.
Grandparenthood becomes a rarity rather than a given.
Exactly. It means institutional memory is constantly being fractured. The transfer of wealth or even just knowledge from one generation to the next is repeatedly cut short.
Cut short by early mortality. That's the invisible toll of a low life expectancy.
It's heartbreaking.
It's tragic on an individual family level, sure, but macroeconomically, it is devastating.
But look at where that upward line goes. From that low of 44.1 years, life expectancy in the AFE region has climbed to roughly 62.5 years.
It's almost a 20-year leap.
A 20-year leap, that is a staggering achievement in human history.
It really is. And it's directly tied to the downward blade of those scissors we talked about.
The disease data.
Right. The proportion of deaths caused by preventable, communicable diseases alongside maternal and nutritional deficiencies has plummeted.
From 9.1% down to roughly 5.0%.
Yes. So they are fundamentally changing how people die, which in turn changes how long they live.
Wow. But, and here's the catch. This incredible triumph in public health creates an immediate, massive demographic consequence.
Because of the youth base.
Exactly, because right next to that scissors chart is a deep blue, completely flat area chart tracking the youth population. It shows the percentage of the total population aged 0 to 14.
And the numbers there are still huge.
Yeah, the line has very slowly slipped down from a historical high of 45%, but the analysts put a black downward arrow ending in a red circle on the current data point,
highlighting that it's currently at 40.3%.
4 out of every 10 people in the entire AFE region are under the age of 14.
It's an immense cohort.
Right. And economists always throw around this phrase, the demographic dividend.
Yes, the golden ticket of development.
The idea that this massive youth population is going to age into the workforce, outnumber the dependents, and just drive a historic economic boom.
That's the theory anyway.
But looking at these two charts, I mean, people living to 62.5 years, combined with a 40.3% youth base, I don't necessarily see an automatic dividend.
What will you see?
I see a coiled spring. It looks like a demographic pressure cooker. I mean, these kids are going to need food, they're going to need health care, and very soon, millions upon millions of them are going to need jobs.
You're hitting on the central anxiety of developmental economics right there.
Amber.
Definitely. A youth bulge is never a guaranteed dividend, it is only a potential dividend.
Okay.
But we have to understand the behavioral shift that happens when you combine that youth bulge with the 62.5-year life expectancy.
How so? Doesn't the longer life expectancy make the pressure worse? Because now you have older people staying in the economy longer alongside this massive youth wave.
Mechanically, yes, it increases the total population. But behaviorally, it changes the entire concept of the future.
Oh, I see.
Think about it. When a population's average expectation of life is only 44 years, the incentive for long-term investment is incredibly low.
Because you might not be around to see the payoff.
Exactly. If you're a parent in that 44-year reality, why would you sacrifice critical immediate income to keep your child in higher education for years?
Right.
Why put capital into slow-growth business infrastructure? The horizon is just too close.
The psychological timeline is compressed. You're basically in permanent survival mode.
Precisely. But when life expectancy jumps to 62, that horizon expands.
That makes total sense.
Families begin to invest heavily in their children's education because they legitimately expect those children to live long enough to see a massive return on that education.
They can actually plan for the future.
All right, people start saving differently. They start planning for decades ahead rather than months ahead.
Yeah.
That psychological shift is the true engine that makes a demographic dividend possible.
Okay, so the foundation is there. We have a massive, healthier youth cohort and families who are theoretically more willing to invest in their futures.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the immediate next question, looking at this deck. What infrastructure is actually waiting for them?
Right, the physical reality.
Yeah, if they are ready to learn, are there schools? If they are ready to build businesses, is there power?
This is where we look at the data on education and electrification in the second section. The structural lighting up of the region, so to speak.
And the education data here is fascinating. It's presented in these contrasting horizontal bars, light gray and dark cyan.
It tracks graduation rates over time.
Right. And the gains in primary education are just undeniable. Primary school graduation has surged from 43.1% up to an impressive 70.5%.
Which is huge.
We're talking about the vast majority of children now completing basic primary education. And the deck shows overall youth literacy climbing from historical single digits to a robust majority.
And this connects perfectly to the health data we just discussed.
Oh, because healthier kids can actually go to school.
Exactly. When you drastically reduce communicable diseases and improve early childhood nutrition, you fundamentally reduce school absenteeism.
That makes sense.
You're dealing with kids who are cognitively and physically more capable of learning simply because their immune systems aren't constantly fighting off chronic, debilitating illnesses.
But there is a glaring bottleneck in this data. Primary graduation is at 70.5%. But when you look at lower secondary graduation, basically middle school.
Yeah, the dark cyan bars.
Right. It has grown, but it's only at 45.6%.
Yeah.
And there are these dashed extension arrows pointing to the right, showing where it needs to go.
That's a severe drop-off. You're losing a massive percentage of that student body right at the critical transition point.
The point where education shifts from just basic literacy to the kind of foundational skills needed for a modern workforce.
Exactly.
So why is that attrition rate so high? I mean, why do they get through primary but drop out before finishing lower secondary?
It's a complex web of factors, obviously, but one of the most revealing answers is sitting right next to the education data in this presentation.
The electrification chart.
Look at the electrification chart.
It's a dumbbell plot. So imagine a horizontal line with a dot on each end, measuring the gap between two realities.
Right.
The data shows that total electricity access for the AFE region has actually doubled. It went from 19.9% up to 50.6%.
Which is a monumental infrastructure achievement on its own. Over half the region now has power.
But look at the two ends of the dumbbell. The analysts put double-sided arrows between them. Look at the rural data.
The rural end is bleak.
It started at a dismal 8.6%, and while it has grown, it is severely lagging behind the urban centers. The gap between the urban electrification rate and the rural electrification rate is vast.
And that gap is the answer to your education question.
Really? How so?
When we talk about rural electricity lagging, we are not just talking about convenience. We aren't talking about charging smartphones or watching television.
Okay.
We are talking about the basic ability to study after sunset.
Wow, right?
If the sun goes down at 6 p.m. and you have homework, but you live in that rural demographic without power,
your day is just over.
your educational day is over. Furthermore, secondary schools require a completely different level of infrastructure than primary schools.
That's true.
You can teach basic primary literacy under a tree or in a simple one-room building. You cannot teach lower secondary science without laboratory equipment.
Yeah.
You cannot teach modern ICT skills without computers, and computers require a reliable power grid.
So it's like looking at a house where the living room is brightly lit, but the bedrooms are completely pitch black.
That's a great analogy.
You have this newly healthier youth cohort, this 70.5% finishing primary school. But the region can't leverage them because the rural areas where so many of them live simply don't have the electrical infrastructure to support secondary schools.
And as these kids get older, the opportunity cost of staying in school skyrockets.
What do you mean?
If you are 13 or 14 years old in a rural, unelectrified village, the pressure to leave a struggling secondary school and start working on the family farm to generate immediate income, it's overwhelming.
Because the school isn't equipped to teach you anything more valuable than what you could earn farming anyway.
Exactly.
So that coiled spring we talked about, that 40.3% youth demographic, it's hitting a structural wall.
It is.
The health interventions poured the foundation, but the transition to the next level of human capital is being bottlenecked by the physical power grid.
And if you don't overcome that bottleneck, that demographic spring doesn't release into an economic dividend. It releases into profound social frustration.
Let's see how that frustration is currently playing out in the broader economy, because this is where the deck reveals a massive structural illusion.
The macroeconomic data.
Yeah, we're looking at the macroeconomic indicators now, and specifically the gross national income, or GNI, per capita.
And it's measured in constant 2015 dollars to filter out the noise of inflation.
Right. And the overarching trend line on this bar chart is positive. GNI per capita has grown from around $1,100 up to over $1,500.
So on average, people are making more.
Yes, but the chart tracking the GDP growth rate is terrifying. The analysts have specifically circled certain years with these thin red warning boxes.
Those are the low points.
Yeah, years showing negative growth, negative 0.1%, negative 2.3%. The journey to that $1,500 wasn't a smooth climb, it was a violent roller coaster.
That volatility is the absolute hallmark of an economy that hasn't built internal resilience.
Internal resilience meaning?
Meaning, when your economy is fundamentally tied to exporting raw materials or relying on rain-fed agriculture, you are completely at the mercy of the outside world.
So out of your control.
Completely. A severe drought or a sudden dip in global commodity prices in London or New York, it doesn't just slow down your growth. It throws your entire regional economy into a contraction.
So we have an economy that is growing overall, but is highly fragile. It's constantly taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back.
Right.
But here is the data point that completely threw me. Next to this roller coaster of a GDP chart, there is an analysis of what sectors actually make up that GDP.
The stacked area chart.
Yes, a 100% stacked area chart. And it shows the service sector completely taking over. The analysts put a big upward expansion arrow on it.
Because the service sector's value added to GDP has climbed steadily.
Right, from 39.4% up to plateau around 55%. It is statistically the economic pillar of the AFE region.
The servicification of the economy.
Yeah, but this is where I have to call a timeout. Because when I hear service economy, my brain automatically goes to a post-industrial Western model.
Sure, most people's do.
I think of finance, insurance, IT consulting, massive healthcare networks, software development. If services are generating 55% of the wealth in the AFE region, why is the GDP chart covered in red warning boxes of negative growth?
That's a great question.
I mean, if they've transitioned to a service economy, why does it feel so incredibly fragile?
Because the word services is doing a massive amount of deceptive heavy lifting here.
Okay, unpack that for me.
We have to completely decouple our Western post-industrial definition of services from what is actually happening on the ground in a developing region.
What is the difference?
In a fully developed economy, as you mentioned, the service sector is typically high-tech, highly formalized, and high value.
Right.
A software company or an accounting firm generates massive corporate tax revenues. They offer secure, high-paying jobs with benefits, and they create deep economic stability.
Right, that's what I picture.
But in many developing regions, the explosive growth of the service sector isn't a sign of advanced post-industrialization. It's actually a symptom of urbanization without industrialization.
Urbanization without industrialization, meaning people are moving to the cities, but there are no factories waiting for them.
Precisely. Let's go back to our rural teenager who dropped out of lower secondary school because they didn't have electricity.
Okay.
Agriculture isn't paying enough to survive, so they move to the urban center looking for a better life. But the AFE region hasn't built a robust, labor-intensive manufacturing sector.
So there's nowhere to clock in.
Right. There's no massive textile mill or automotive assembly plant to absorb thousands of low-skill workers. So what do they do to survive?
They just have to invent a job for themselves.
Exactly. They enter the informal tourist sector.
Oh, I see.
They become street vendors, selling phone accessories. They become unregulated motorbike taxi drivers. They do informal domestic work or small-scale retail trading on the pavement.
And all of that counts as services.
All of that economic activity is technically categorized under services.
Wow. So it's not a software architect building a cloud network. It's a guy selling bottled water at a traffic light.
Now, to be fair to the data, there is genuine growth in modern services in the AFE region, too.
Like what?
Telecommunications, mobile banking, and digital infrastructure are expanding, which we'll see when we look at the trade data later.
Okay, sure.
But a massive, disproportionate chunk of that 55% GDP share is low productivity, informal survival services.
Survival services.
Yes. It generates enough microtransactions to bump up the GNI per capita to $1,500. But it does not build a resilient, shock-proof economic foundation.
It's like building a skyscraper with a beautiful, modern penthouse, the telecom and banking sectors, but the foundation and the lower 60 floors are completely crumbling.
That is a very accurate way to visualize it.
The wealth is highly concentrated, and the base is structurally unsound.
And that structural unsoundness becomes horrifyingly clear when we look at the labor market data in Section 4.
Which brings us to the employment quality crisis. This is where the structural illusion of the 55% service economy completely falls apart visually.
The tree map chart.
Yes, or waffle chart. It maps out where people actually work. It's basically a large square divided into smaller blocks based on employment sectors.
And the proportions are starting.
Startling is an understatement. I mean, despite services supposedly generating 55% of the economic output, the block representing agricultural jobs is absolutely massive. It completely dominates the map.
Okay?
Agriculture stubbornly continues to employ between 56.3% and 61% of the entire workforce. They highlight it with these stark contrast boxes.
And look at the industrial block.
It's tiny. Industrial employment for males, which historically is the exact pathway that builds a stable middle class, is completely stagnant. It fluctuates around a mere 13.7%.
Economists refer to this as a severe mismatch between output structure and employment structure.
Meaning the money isn't where the jobs are?
Exactly. The wealth of the nation is being generated by a service sector that simply doesn't employ the masses. And the sector that is employing the masses, agriculture, isn't generating the wealth.
So I'm looking at this data and it's just blowing my mind. We have 60% of the people working in the dirt generating a fraction of the GDP, while a smaller cohort in the cities generates the bulk of the wealth.
It's incredibly imbalanced.
But it gets worse, because the analysts have included a massive dashboard graphic right next to this tree map.
Ah, yes, the vulnerability metric.
It's just a single number written in thick, dark gray font, and there's a giant red warning icon next to it, a circle with an exclamation mark.
72%.
72% of all employment in the AFE region is classified as vulnerable employment.
And we should define what that actually means on the ground.
The slide defines it explicitly. Unpaid family workers and self-employed individuals operating entirely in the informal economy.
Right.
That means 7 out of 10 workers have no formal employment contracts. They have no health insurance. They have no pension, no unemployment benefits, no social safety net whatsoever.
This is the ground level reality of that service sector illusion we just discussed.
It's terrifying.
It is. When 72% of your workforce is in vulnerable employment, your society has zero shock absorbers.
Zero.
A single localized crisis, a poor harvest, a sudden medical emergency in the family, or even just a spike in global fuel prices. It doesn't just inconvenience these workers. It plunges them immediately into extreme poverty.
There is no buffer between a bad month and absolute destitution.
None.
And this brings us right back to our coiled spring. Think about that 40.3% youth cohort.
The demographic pressure cooker.
Right. We established they are living longer. We established that 70% of them are now finishing primary school, meaning their expectations for their own lives are fundamentally higher than their grandparents' expectations were.
Absolutely. They expect more.
What happens when millions of these literate, hopeful young people enter a labor market where 72% of the jobs offer zero security and zero path to the middle class?
It is the ultimate recipe for systemic socioeconomic volatility.
Because they're going to be furious.
Yes. You have elevated human capital colliding with stagnant structural opportunity. These young people do not want to return to subsistence agriculture. They know there's a wider world out there.
Right, they have phones, they can see it.
Exactly. But because the formal industrial sector is stuck at 13.7%, the jobs they aspire to simply do not exist.
So they have no choice.
So they are forced into the informal street economy, hustling in that vulnerable 72% bracket. It breeds deep disenfranchisement.
It's a tragedy of misplaced potential. It's like having a state-of-the-art engine, the service sector, dropped into a horse-drawn carriage. The wheels are going to come off.
That's a very vivid way to put it.
And while the human capital is struggling to find a secure foothold, the region itself is paying a massive physical price just to keep this flawed engine running.
It brings us to the environmental and resource data.
Right. Let's shift our focus to Section 5, because the hidden costs of this specific flavor of economic growth are severe.
We have to look at the carbon footprint and the mineral depletion rates, because modernization, even unbalanced modernization, requires immense energy and capital.
The carbon data is mapped on this stark, aggressive, dark gray step line chart. It tracks CO2 emissions generated strictly from the electricity sector.
And it follows a very clear trend.
Yeah, the analysts put thick, heavy arrows following the steep upward curve. Emissions have jumped from a baseline of 6.5 megatons all the way up to 196.3 megatons.
That is an immense multiplier.
It's huge.
Now, we must maintain objectivity here. If you look at the global context, the per capita emissions of an individual living in the AFE region are still vastly lower than a citizen in North America or Europe.
Right. The historical carbon debt of this region is practically non-existent.
Exactly.
I've seen that argument, and it's entirely fair. Why should a developing region be lectured about carbon when they are just trying to turn the lights on while the West has been burning coal for 2 centuries?
It's a completely valid point from an equity perspective. But the atmosphere doesn't care about fairness. It only cares about aggregate volume.
Right.
And the aggregate rise in the AFE region is incredibly steep.
Because of that rapid electrification we discussed earlier, to take total power access from 19.9% up to 50.6%, you have to burn an incredible amount of fuel.
And because they lack the capital to build out massive, cutting-edge renewable grids from scratch, they are heavily reliant on carbon-intensive legacy energy systems to achieve that modernization.
So they're building fossil fuel plants because it's what they can afford right now.
Yes, they are paying a steep environmental price just to support the basic survival and urbanization of that growing population.
But the hidden costs aren't just in the air. They're literally being dug out of the earth.
The mineral depletion data.
Yeah, right next to the emissions chart is a scatter plot tracking mineral depletion. And the data points fluctuate wildly, showing mineral depletion representing anywhere from 0.3% to 1.6% of the region's entire gross national income.
And look closely at the visual on that scatter plot. The analysts have drawn semi-translucent dashed circles around specific clusters of peaks.
Yeah, I see those.
Do you see a pattern in those years?
The peaks seem to happen in decade-long bursts, and then it drops off, and then peaks again.
Those dashed circles are mapping what economists call commodity supercycles.
Commodity supercycles. I know the term, but how does it function in this specific context?
So a commodity supercycle is an extended period, often a decade or more, where global demand for raw materials massively outstrips supply.
Driving prices to historic highs.
Exactly. Think of the massive infrastructure boom in China during the 2000s. They needed infinite amounts of copper, cobalt, and iron ore.
Right.
When global prices skyrocket, the AFE region goes into overdrive, digging up and exporting its natural resources at a frantic pace to capture that cash. That's what those spikes in mineral depletion represent.
So they are literally mining their national wealth out of the ground and shipping it overseas.
Yes. And here is the critical insight this data is screaming at us. Mining wealth isn't inherently bad if you use it correctly.
Okay, what's the correct way?
Well, the data suggests that in the AFE region, this massive resource extraction is not being fully converted into fixed national savings.
What's the difference between fleeting wealth and fixed savings?
When you dig a ton of copper out of the ground and sell it, that copper is gone forever. Your country is now physically poorer by 1 ton of copper.
Right. You can't mine it twice.
Exactly. If you take the revenue from that sale and use it to build a hydroelectric dam or a paved national highway system or a state-of-the-art university.
Then you've traded the copper for something lasting.
Yes. You have successfully converted a temporary depletable resource into a permanent, fixed national asset, an asset that will generate value for generations.
But if you don't do that?
If that revenue is lost to institutional corruption, or if it's used to pay the interest on short-term foreign debt, or if it's just absorbed by importing basic consumer goods because you have no local manufacturing,
then the wealth is just gone.
then you haven't created wealth. You've just pawned your country's furniture to pay the rent.
Wow.
The extreme fluctuations on this chart indicate a deep reliance on extracting natural wealth without a corresponding mechanism to capture that wealth for endogenous growth.
Endogenous growth, meaning growth that is generated from the internal engines of the economy, rather than just relying on the outside world's appetite for raw dirt.
Exactly. True economic development has to be self-sustaining.
Well, speaking of relying on the outside world, that brings us to the final matrix of this data deck, the external lifelines.
This is a crucial section.
Because if they aren't manufacturing anything, and 72% of the workforce is informal, how's the system actually staying afloat?
This is where we look at trade modernization, but more importantly, foreign capital inflows.
The trade data actually starts with a glimmer of hope. There's a slope graph here showing the composition of service imports over a 10-year period.
The crossover lines.
Yeah, it shows that traditional transport services have dropped from 46.2% of imports down to roughly 39.2%. But the line for ICT information, computer, and telecommunications services is sloping sharply upward.
Which is a genuinely positive indicator.
It is.
Yes. It means the AFE region is actively integrating into the global digital economy. They are importing modern software architecture, cloud services, and telecommunications networks.
Right. This is the infrastructure needed to formalize that 55% service sector we talked about earlier.
Exactly.
It's the penthouse of our skyscraper investing in better elevator.
That's a good way to look at it. It shows an appetite for modernization. But, and this is a massive but, you have to contextualize that modernization against how the region is actually funding itself.
And that leads to the most shocking data visualization in this entire presentation.
The dual bar chart.
Yes.
Yeah.
Next to the trade slope graph is this dual bar chart, and one of the columns is just dramatic. It literally goes soaring off the top of the standard grid, and the analysts have attached a stark, dark call-out line to it.
Yeah. It's tracking net official development assistance.
Foreign aid.
Look at the baseline and the peak.
The data shows that foreign aid flowing into the region has skyrocketed from a baseline of $3.36 billion to an astronomical peak of $37.1 billion.
It's unbelievable.
And the footnote explicitly states this is calculated in constant 2023 dollars, so this isn't just an illusion created by inflation. This is a massive tenfold increase in real financial reliance.
A $37.1 billion injection.
And right next to it is the data on personal remittances money sent home by citizens who have left the region to work abroad. That number has climbed steadily from 0.5% of GDP to over 1%.
Let's synthesize this. Look at the call-out line from the analyst on that chart. What is the explicit conclusion?
The label simply reads, deep dependence on international aid.
Right.
So I'm trying to wrap my head around this. On one hand, the region is importing high-end digital services to modernize its banks and telecom networks.
Yep.
But on the other hand, it is effectively paying for its basic survival with a $37 billion 5E drip of foreign aid.
That is the incredibly uncomfortable truth of the AFE macroeconomic reality.
It's a huge contradiction.
It is. The region is surviving. In metrics like public health and basic education, it is genuinely, tangibly growing. But it is fundamentally incapable of funding its own survival.
Wow.
It is heavily reliant on external sovereign funds to keep the hospitals running, to build those primary schools, and to keep the economy moving.
What about the remittances? I always hear politicians frame remittances as a great thing. It's, hardworking citizens sending cash directly into the pockets of local families, bypassing corrupt governments entirely.
On a micro level, for the individual family receiving the cash, remittances are an absolute lifeline. They put food on the table and keep the lights on.
Right.
But on a macro level, a steady rise in remittances as a percentage of GDP is a glaring warning siren.
Why? Because it proves the domestic economy has failed.
It proves that domestic capital accumulation is entirely insufficient. Think about who actually leaves a country to work abroad.
Usually young, healthy people.
It's usually your most ambitious, capable, and risk-tolerant young people. They leave because the internal economy, that 72% vulnerable labor market, cannot offer them a dignified return on their labor.
So they have to look elsewhere.
Exactly. So they emigrate. They become the region's most valuable export.
Wow. Instead of exporting manufactured goods, they export their best human capital and import the cash just to tread water.
Exactly. And the systemic danger here is profound. Relying on $37 billion in official development assistance means your national sovereignty is heavily compromised.
Because someone else holds the purse strings.
Precisely. Your budget for rural electrification or for finishing those lower secondary schools isn't determined by your own tax base. It's determined by the political whims of foreign capitals.
That is terrifying.
If a major donor nation across the globe experiences a recession and decides to slash its foreign aid budget, the shockwaves in the AFE region would be immediate and catastrophic.
Okay, we have covered an immense amount of ground here. We've walked through this entire minimalist data deck, from the birth rates to the carbon emissions to the foreign aid.
It's a lot to process.
It really is. Let's pull all of these threads together. Based on everything we've unpacked, what are the three core conclusions this data is forcing us to confront?
The first conclusion is undeniable progress. Massive historic leaps in public health and primary education are creating a powerful demographic dividend.
The coiled spring.
Exactly. People are living to 62 years old, 70% of kids are finishing primary school, and the region is deeply young and ambitious.
Right. And the second conclusion is the structural illusion.
The service sector.
Yes, the so-called servicification of the economy is largely a mirage. Yes, services mathematically account for 55% of the GDP, but it's an urban survival economy.
It hasn't solved the core issue.
Exactly. It has utterly failed to transform the labor market, leaving 60% of people stuck in agriculture and condemning 72% of all workers to informal, highly vulnerable jobs.
And the third conclusion is the fragility of the lifeline.
The $37 billion.
Yes. The entire socioeconomic system is currently propped up by the rapid, fleeting extraction of natural resources and a massive dependency on foreign aid and remittances.
It is a system in profound transition, but one that lacks a solid foundation.
Which perfectly explains the final visual detail in this presentation.
Yes, the very bottom of the last slide. There is no grand, triumphant concluding graphic. There is just a simple, horizontal, gray timeline acting as a border along the edge.
And what does the label say?
The label printed on it is simply the unfinished transition.
It's a sobering acknowledgement. The data shows how far they've come from the historical lows, but highlights exactly how perilous the next step is.
So to you, the listener, as you think about the future of the Africa Eastern and Southern region, the path forward seems intensely clear, yet incredibly difficult.
It won't be easy.
If this region is ever going to rip out that $37 billion 4V drip of foreign aid, they have to build internal endogenous growth engines.
They can't just keep mining.
Right. They cannot simply rely on digging up raw copper to sell to the highest bidder, and they cannot rely on waiting for aid checks to build their schools.
It's going to require deep systemic governance reform.
Exactly, to actually capture and reinvest their resource wealth. And it will take a monumental effort to upgrade local manufacturing and infrastructure to create formal, secure jobs.
They essentially have to build the industrial middle class that is currently entirely missing from the data.
That is the key. So I want to leave you pondering one final question. Think back to that very first chart we discussed.
Youth demographic.
Yeah, that deep blue area showing 40.3% of the population under 14 years old. Over the next decade, that massive, increasingly educated, healthier youth cohort is going to come of age.
And they're going to need jobs.
When they step into the economy, what will their role be? Will they be forced by a stagnant labor market to leave their homes, becoming just another generation exporting their labor and sending remittances back to survive? Or will they be the generation that finally builds the missing industrial foundation, formalizes the economy, and finishes the transition?
The data outlines the exact parameters of the challenge, but it's the people on the ground who will ultimately decide the outcome.
When we started this deep dive, we talked about how tempting it is to look for a simple narrative. A clean headline that says a region is either booming or failing.
But the truth is always messier.
Always. Looking at the cold, hard data of the AFE region, the reality is so much more compelling than a simple headline. It shows a society that is growing rapidly, healing from historical diseases, but struggling desperately to support its own weight without a crutch.
It's not a clean break. It's an ongoing, muddy, and absolutely fascinating evolution.
It really is. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the data. Keep looking beneath the surface of the statistics, and we'll see you next time.